Mr. President, may I speak for up to 20 minutes as if in morning business?
Without objection.
Mr. President, Grist, the publication, did an article recently about climate change with a bunch of images. I grabbed a few of those images, and I have added a few in this speech, because they give a pretty good overview of the mess that we are in on climate change. Right now, the most devastating wildfires anyone can remember are ripping across Australia. Here you see an iconic kangaroo going by a building up in flames. Those Australian fires have destroyed thousands of homes. They've killed an estimated 1 billion animals. Get your head around 1 billion animals killed. And they've made a day of breathing the air in Sydney, Australia, the equivalent of smoking 37 cigarettes. In fact, I read in the news that in a tennis championship in Australia today, one of the competitors withdrew because the air was so bad she couldn't finish her match. Why is this going on? According to the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, Australia has warmed by about a full degree Celsius over the last century. That means a longer, hotter fire season, which loads the dice in favor of extreme winds and heat and bushfire, as they call it in Australia. So why did it warm in Australia? Well, the cause could not be more clear. This is the measurement of carbon dioxide levels in Earth's atmosphere going back hundreds of thousands of years. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800,000 years. Way back. No agriculture then. No wheel then. For sure no Twitter. Nothing. Over time, we have seen this steady range of atmospheric CO2 levels running between about 180 and here's the cresting out just under 300 parts per million. 800,000 years. All between 180 and 300 degrees. 120 degree range. We're now out of that range by more than the entire range itself. We're out by more than 120. This chart goes up to 400 parts per million. We are literally off the chart right now at 410 parts per million. And of course, this is connected to heat. That is not news. The graphics here were compiled by Clayton Aldern and Emily Pontecorvo of Grist, so let me take this opportunity to thank them. This next chart shows the increase in carbon dioxide just in the last decade. This is 2010 to 2019. So if you took the previous graph, which is in here somewhere, this guy, all right, this is just the tiniest little slice at the very edge of this. Just 10 years out of 800,000. So like 1/80,000th of that graph, that tiny little sliver. And in that tiny little sliver, here's what's happened. It's gone from below 390 parts per million up to 410. We hit the magic 400 back in about 2013 for the first time right here with that dot. That was a big deal. The measurement came from NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. Never, never, never before in human history, over those hundreds of thousands of years, had we seen 400 parts per million. And in just the last decade, it's shot up by all this more. In fact, in the last 7 years, more than 10 parts per million. Now, we know something about what happens as these CO2 levels go up. We know that the planet warms. That is not news. We have known that since Abraham Lincoln was president. When Abraham Lincoln was riding around Washington in his top hat, scientists had already begun to write about and understand the link between greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and global warming. Heck, even Exxon scientists knew about this decades ago, and their scientists warned the company about this in reports that we now have. Of course, Exxon did the wickedest possible thing with that information, which is to bury it, deny it, and try to convince the public that the opposite was true. But there's nothing new in any of this information. The science is totally established, and that level is unprecedented in humankind's history. As a result, guess what? Things have started to go haywire. This chart shows the cost of annual billion-dollar disasters in the United States, the disasters that cost us $1 billion each. There's a very clear trend line that draws through this, and it is climbing upward. And if you don't believe me, ask an insurance company, ask a reinsurance company. Now, bear in mind that these costs, the costs of natural disasters, they're just one of the big economic threats from climate change. We have got warnings about coastal property values crashing. Those come from Freddie Mac, of all places. We've got warnings about the carbon bubble crashing. Those come from the Bank of England and many other sovereign banks. We've got warnings about insurance markets and about bond safety of coastal communities. In fact, those numbers, the numbers of the cost of natural disasters, are actually pretty tiny so far compared to what's projected. What is projected is an estimated tens of trillions of dollars by 2100. One way this plays out is in my home state. This is northern Narragansett Bay. Here's Providence, our capital city, and here's Warwick, and over here is Bristol. And everything that's blue on this map is land today. On these blue parts, people have homes, people have businesses, the state has infrastructure, there is economic activity, and my God, there are memories. Well, the blue disappears. The blue disappears. The blue disappears at 10 feet of sea level rise. That's what this measures. This comes off of a program called Storm Tools, run by the Coastal Resources Management Council, our Rhode Island CZMA agency. Our state officials, based on the latest information from NOAA and from our University of Rhode Island and from the Coastal Resources Management Council, are preparing for scenarios up to 9 feet of sea level rise in Rhode Island by the end of the century. Not storm surge, just bathtub level sea level rise. Add in storm surge, you not only get over 9 feet, you get over the 10 feet that is displayed here in this graph. The damage to my state is going to be very serious. The very map of Rhode Island will change because of this. Now, some of my colleagues think this is all funny. This is something we can just like yuck it up about and mock the science and call people alarmists when they take this seriously. It is deadly serious. In fact, a 2017 report from the real estate database company Zillow identified over 4,800 homes in Rhode Island with a collective value at over $3 billion that would be underwater by 2100 using only a 6-foot bathtub sea level rise figure. $3 billion just in my small state. And that doesn't count the value of the memories. If you've got a house near the shore, you very likely have family memories. Some of these places in Rhode Island go back generations. Even small houses, people have had them, their grandfather had it. They got memories. All of that risks to be lost. So don't think I'm not going to fight about this just because somebody else thinks this is funny. The reason that's happening is because the oceans are warming. And when you warm water, it expands. So it rises. In addition, of course, to all the trillions of gallons pouring off of Greenland and other land-based ice caps. Look at how the ocean has warmed. The red is the 3-month average, so it's got more variation in it. The black is the annual average. The blue is the 5-year average that smooths it out a little bit more. The ocean is absorbing intense amounts of heat. I'll tell you how much heat the ocean is absorbing. If you took the Hiroshima atom bomb and you captured all of its energy as heat, it produced light, it produced a variety of other things. If you captured all of its energy as heat, the rate at which the ocean is warming is the equivalent, I usually use, of between 3 and 4 Hiroshima-sized nuclear detonations per second in the ocean. Per second. So in the time of this speech, there'll be dozens, probably 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear explosions worth of heat that the oceans have to absorb. And today a new report came out that says that the number is actually 5 Hiroshima-sized explosions per second. As they measure it better, as they see it increase more, we're seeing that number. And it's not just that they're warming, that would be bad enough, they're becoming more acid. They're becoming more acid because they absorb carbon dioxide at the surface. There's a chemical interface. This took away 90% of the extra heat that our fossil fuel emissions have caused. The absorption of the heat by the oceans. At the same time, while it was absorbing 90% of the heat, it was also absorbing 30% of the carbon dioxide. So imagine for a second if we were not an ocean planet. Imagine if we were a fully terrestrial planet and we didn't have the oceans to buffer this. So you'd have to add back that extra third of CO2, which would be a 50% increase on the lower base, and you'd have to multiply by 10 the increase from heat, and you put those two factors together, and this is a very rough number, and the scientists on my staff will be mad at me for saying this, but maybe 15 times the result that we're seeing right now. We are experiencing a fraction of what we'd face without the cooling and buffering oceans. Without our oceans, Australia wouldn't just be one location on fire. The whole planet would be a catastrophe. Those are the chances that we're taking. Why are we taking these chances? We're taking these chances because politicians don't dare say no to the crooked fossil fuel industry that profits from this mess. That is just the sickening political fact that we have to deal with here. That is steadily moving because the public is beginning to understand this, notwithstanding a long and very, very expensive campaign of misleading propaganda by the fossil fuel industry. People are starting to catch on. These are the numbers from 60 up to 72% of people who believe that warming is happening. Number of people who are denying, from 20% down to 12%. Understanding is up, denial is down. Ditto for it's caused by us. 46 up to 59%, 35 down to 30% denying. Understanding up, denial down. So the other thing that's good that's happening behind these numbers is that Americans of a whole variety of persuasions actually favor the solutions that scientists and economists recommend to solve the climate change problem. Now, the fossil fuel industry in its portfolio of lies tells you that the remedies to solve climate change will be painful. But that is just another fossil fuel lie. and Americans are catching on to that one too. An October 2019 Pew poll found that 2/3 of Americans want the federal government to do more to combat climate change. One thing that we're getting rid of in a hurry is coal. This represents the cumulative retirements of coal plants. Coal plants are phasing out. 546 coal plants closed in the U.S. since 2010, just in this last decade. In late 2019, Murray Energy became the 8th U.S. coal company in a year to file for bankruptcy. Coal plants anywhere are virtually unfinanceable. We have even seen operating depreciated coal plants close because just operating that coal plant costs more than financing and building and operating renewable energy facilities. So that is good news for our safety and for our well-being. Here's our overall energy portfolio and where it's increased. Look at solar go. Oh my gosh. It's up about 1,000%. It is really, really rocketing. Second biggest increase, wind. And more coming on as we begin to develop offshore wind. Fossil fuels still dominate. You can see this little inlay here, the transportation sector. But Americans are starting to buy more and more electric vehicles, and some really stunning new models are coming to the market. We are, of course, not doing anywhere near enough to encourage their adoption, which means we are likely to lose out. And we're doing this because rogue fossil fuel companies, like Marathon Petroleum, use political mischief to poke sticks in the wheels of vehicle fuel efficiency standards. Now, what the fossil fuel industry likes to do is to blame China. Oh, we're not going to do anything because China has to go first. What they omit to tell you is that at the end of 2017, 40% of all the electric cars in the world were in China. In 2018, China manufactured nearly half of all electric vehicles worldwide. China dominates global markets for electric buses and for electric two-wheelers, scooters, and so forth. You may recall that Exxon Corporation fabulously predicted to its shareholders, a prediction they have not yet corrected, that there would be 0 electric buses by 2040. China's already operating 400,000. We are going to get run away from by China if we don't smarten up and compete. Here's more good news. The price of digging out and transporting and burning dirty fuels is high. Nearly $110 for a megawatt hour of coal-fueled power. If you look, most expensive are nuclear power plants, next most expensive, coal, next most expensive, solar thermal that generates heat, next most expensive, natural gas, and down here, the two cheapest by far, solar, photovoltaic, and wind. So we know where these markets are going. Just $40 per megawatt hour for solar photovoltaic compared to $110 for coal. Over the last decade, the average cost of solar dropped from over $200 per megawatt hour to less than a quarter of that. The cost of wind power is down, and offshore wind is emerging. Battery storage now competes on price with gas-fired peak demand plants in many areas. Even with the massive subsidy that we all have to pay to prop up fossil fuel, renewables are starting to win on price anyway. If the prices of wind, solar, battery storage, and other renewable technologies continue to drop, we could reach 100% renewable energy by the middle of the century. And we will need to if we're going to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius safe zone. And in fact, here's what you see. The power sector's emissions are declining. Lots of work left to do in transportation, what you might call room for improvement there. Lots of room for improvement in industry, lots of room for improvement in buildings and other. So there's work to be done here. Of course, these other sectors don't have much of an incentive to solve their emissions problem because it is still free to pollute. We continue to violate the most basic market theory about externalities, and we let these fossil fuel polluters pollute for free. And when we let them pollute for free, it takes away any incentive in these other sectors to fix that problem. And of course, that is goal one for the fossil fuel industry. With a $650 billion per year subsidy, they are throwing everything they have politically at trying to protect that phony, non-market-based, unfair subsidy. And even with it, they're still losing. But we could be doing better in all these sectors if we put a proper market-based price on carbon. Well, so far they've won. If you can call not preparing for a looming calamity to be winning. So, quick summary of the lessons of the 2010s. The science is clear. We've blown by 400 parts per million. We are now in uncharted territory for the human species. 2, climate change is a massive threat to our economy, particularly with the danger of crashes coming soon in coastal property values and carbon assets. I just read the letter from BlackRock to CEOs and investors. BlackRock is one of the biggest investment companies in the world. They have warned of what they called capital reallocation. Capital reallocation, that means things are going to shift, happening as markets anticipate climate hazard. Things like facing the danger of coastal property value crashes or carbon asset value crashes. Those crashes create capital reallocation. I love the way economists talk. All the agony behind that, they call it capital reallocation. Wrecking the world economy, they call systemic risk. Point 3, Americans are really getting that climate change is a big problem. And it's a big change, and it's a big change particularly with young Republicans who totally get it. Here's my challenge to my Republican colleagues here in the Senate. Sit down with your own young staffers. Sit down with the young staffers in your own office and hear them out about climate change. You will see that there is a big generational divide. Coal is on the ropes. That's point 4. Experts predict huge stranded assets in gas and oil, and solar and other renewables are booming as they outcompete fossil fuel on cost alone. That is a genie even the crooked fossil fuel machine can't put back in the bottle. And of course, the fossil fuel industry is still up to no good with its vast array of phony front groups, so it doesn't look like it's them. They've got names like the George C. Marshall Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heartland Institute, a bunch of phony front groups filled with stables of paid liars, emitting slimy rivers of dark money, polluting our politics as badly as their emissions pollute our planet. That hasn't stopped, and they should be held accountable. Madam President, the 2020s are going to be tough, for sure. Australia's just seeing the opening episode. I have an analogy that I'll use as I close, because I've spent time running rivers. I like running rivers. I like running rivers in inflatables. I like running rivers in kayaks. I've run rivers from the placid Rappahannock in Virginia to the mighty Colorado through our massive Grand Canyon, and lots in between. And one of the things about running a river that has big rapids is that the first thing you do is you look at the map and you learn where the big rapids are. So you can stop, get safely to shore, and figure out whether you can navigate the rapid or whether you need to portage around it. Well, we had a map for where the rapids are on this. The scientists showed us, they told us, they warned us, but we ignored them. But not paying attention to what you're told on the science map, that's not your last chance. When you get closer going down the river, you can actually start to hear the falls, the rapids roaring up ahead of you. Well, the wildfires, the flooding, the seas rising, the species relocating around the planet, if that's not a roaring for us to hear now from the planet about the dangers ahead, shame on us. It is enough for us to know we're actually getting close. We're getting close to big trouble. And we still do nothing. And then there's a point on the river when it's your last chance. You have no choice if you're going to miss the rapids or the falls ahead. You've ignored all the warnings. You've ignored the map. You haven't listened to the roar. And now you're close. So now you'll have to paddle really, really hard to avoid the roaring rapids ahead. Nature's forces are pulling you inexorably toward the cataract. You'll have to paddle for your lives to avoid it. That's where I believe we are right now. I believe that as humankind, as a country, we've got to paddle for our lives right now to avoid being sucked over the climate falls and into dangers that we don't want to see and that we don't want our children to have to see. So let's wake up here. Let's shake off the shackles of this crooked fossil fuel industry, and let's get paddling for our lives. I yield the floor.